Hello, I'm Kerwin Charles, Dean of the Yale School of Management, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to Yale University's 2020 Gordon Grand Fellowship Lecture. Gordon Grand was a 1938 Yale College graduate who served as the president and CEO of the Olin Corporation, and this fellowship was established in his honor in 1973. I feel especially heartened to be hosting today's event, given how strongly Gordon Grand embodied the spirit of SOM in connecting business and society. Anne Wojcicki also embodies that spirit, and we are thrilled to welcome her as this year's Gordon Grand Fellow. Anne attended Yale College, where she was a resident of Jonathan Edwards College and played varsity women's ice hockey. She graduated in 1996 with a degree in biology. After working on Wall Street in healthcare investment, Anne sought to create a business that helps people prevent illness rather than profit from it. In 2006, she co-founded 23andMe, a direct-to-consumer DNA testing company that she leads as CEO. Anne's vision and persistence have allowed 23andMe to provide millions of consumers with unprecedented access to genetic information, and furthermore, to bring them personalized medicine through its research platform. 23andMe has been named a technology pioneer by the World Economic Forum, and Anne has been named the most daring CEO by Fast Company. Earlier this year, Anne was recognized by Forbes as one of the 16 most influential modern tech leaders. Anne will be joined by Yale University President Peter Salovey for a candid conversation. We solicited your questions in advance, and President Salovey will be reading some of these questions to Anne today. Without further ado, I proudly introduce you to this year's Gordon Grand Fellow, Anne Wojcicki, and our president, Peter Salovey.
Well, thank you, Dean Charles, and Anne, and welcome. It's great to see you, and it's wonderful to have the opportunity to connect on Zoom. This is our first virtual Gordon Grand Fellowship event, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too.
I think we have about 300 people registered, students, faculty, staff, alumni, New Haven community members, and we're recording, and so many others will have an opportunity to watch this later. So let me start with what's most important, your experiences at Yale, and you graduated Yale College in 1996. You were at Jonathan Edwards College resident, and you were a college aide helping organize events, perhaps ones just like this one.
Exactly.
And you were a biology major. So when you think back on that time, what are your favorite memories about Yale and New Haven? What are the highlights for you?
I have some great photos for you to pull up as we speak here. So, let's see, there I am. So I can't even express in words how much I loved my Yale experience. Like I should say, I didn't want to go to Yale. I think people don't necessarily know. It's like, I didn't want to go to Yale. I was dead set. I was going to go to Harvard. And it was my mom. My mom had a student at Yale, and she made me, my mom, it can be a little pushy at times. She made me go and visit. And I stayed. I was like during, I forgot what week it was. It was like once you had been admitted, your pre-frosh week. And I stayed with this woman, Angela Wanson, who's now Angela Buckdahl. And she was fascinating. She's like, oh yeah, I'm Korean American and I'm Jewish, and I'm going to be the first Korean cantor and rabbi. And I was like blown away. Like she was so enthusiastic and passionate. And she took me out to Naples, the pizza place, and we had this amazing debate about the definition of rock and roll. And I I was overwhelmed. Like for me, it was everything. It was people who were so curious about the world and so passionate. And I love the intellectual discussions. It wasn't about, the jobs and exactly, like my background. Like it was this like sense of the beauty of the world and like the opportunities. And I have to say, I'm so thankful for that moment. And I'm still friends with Angela. And I think back on that discussion about, the definition of rock and roll at Yale, and everything that, like, I got to Yale, and it was, the people I met, they're everything. And I can't emphasize enough how much those people, like I stay in touch with. They've all gone on to done like incredibly interesting things, but it was a community that was really passionate about, their interests. And I love, the other thing I love about Yale that I think is really unique is the college system, because it forced me to become friends with a lot of people that I probably never otherwise would have been friends with. And I wouldn't have naturally been in that same, in the mix, like our interests just were totally different. But I love, like over those 4 years, the way my mind was expanded and the people I met, it was amazing. And, I started out also as a molecular biophysics, biochemistry major. And I kind of quickly realized that that might be more intense than I was capable of. And, I switched to being a biology major, and I loved, I worked for Sid Altman, who I worked in his lab. I had, I loved working in the lab. The various people that were there, I spent a lot of time with, and, really cultivated these relationships. And the thing that I did is like, I was just super curious, like asking people all the time. So I stayed in touch with a bunch of them, and they kind of joked. They're like, "You're that intern that never goes away, that I keep showing up over and over again." And I did work. I worked as the master's aide, and this was the picture of me working. This is all three of us that were the master's aides. And I was really lucky because I had this incredible relationship with Bernie Litton, who was, back in the days when we had our masters, like he was our master. And I learned a lot from, that process. I was in charge of storage. So I had to help coordinate the 300 residents of JE to manage their storage, and people were always late and like disorganized. So it was really like, again, I can't say enough. I loved my experience.
That's so great to hear. And can you point to a specific moment or incident or person who, that was your formative experience at Yale, that really changed the course of events, the course of your life?
I think that the thing that really changed the course of my events, it's one thing it's like one of the pieces of advice I give people when you go to college. The people that you meet at Yale, like your connections, whether it's a professor or it's your peers or your students, like are truly extraordinary. And you should do everything you can to form the bonds with those people and get as much out of the community that you're part of. Like you will never again be part of a community of people between 18 and 23 who are handpicked to be passionate, enterprising individuals who are all living together. And I think about like what made me who I am are my 4 roommates. And we always joke, like it was that we were sort of like, we were so different, like unbelievably different from completely different backgrounds. And what I learned and how they, in some ways, like we all terrorized each other and in the most positive possible way, but we made each other really better. And to this day, I rely on them for honesty. So I think it was sort of this moment of, recognize, like it was hard. Freshman year for me was actually quite hard. Also was in a bad winter in 1992. And it was the first day I remember seeing the little buds come on the trees. I looked out of my 4th floor window and I looked down and I could see these buds. And it was the first, I was like, I can do anything. Like, I just like it's such a different environment. It was such a different, you know, kind of winter experience. And just like, I remember that moment of spring, I was like, I made it. Like, I can do anything. And like I said, it's all my experiences from Yale, when I think back on what was most meaningful, it's the people.
Yeah. Did you ever think you'd be an entrepreneur? Obviously, you thought about biology and being a biologist, but what about being an entrepreneur, starting a company?
I always liked business, and I realized it wasn't as much. I don't like business per se. I like solving problems. And for me, like, I remember actually sitting with Basha Goddard, who ran the master's office. And I remember I would brainstorm with her. And she was really helpful. She was like, listen, she was one of the people who taught me. She was like, maximize your value time at Yale about, you know, like getting everything you can from this community. Don't worry about starting anything just yet. Because I always loved solving problems. And in some ways you don't, like at this age, you don't necessarily know what problems you want to solve. Some people do, some people don't. But I loved brainstorming. And as a kid, you know, my sisters and I, we always joke, like as kids, we used to like steal our neighbors' lemons, and we used to sell lemons up and down the street every day to make money. And in high school, I wanted to go skiing, and I didn't have the money to go skiing. So I started a ski trip business, and I would, you know, have my, like anyone from school could sign up. So I always liked starting things. And, but again, it was always sort of with that purpose of like, I want to solve a problem.
Yeah. Well, that sounds pretty entrepreneurial, selling hot lemons and
yeah,
you know, organizing a ski trip so that you can go on it. I mean, there's a theme here.
Yeah, and I always, like I said, I always love starting things. Sadly, about the lemons, our neighbor finally, like just recently, told my children like to stop stealing the lemons.
One more Yale question. Anything as you look back 25 years ago that you would, you think you should have done differently?
I think that, you know, there was probably, I think I did it pretty good. I have to say, my roommates and I, we talk about this. Like my sister went to Harvard, and she graduated by the time I started college. Mm-hmm. And she's the one had warned me. She's like, listen, you know, once you get out, it's a different, like, you're out, and you don't necessarily have people to ask questions to, and you don't have friends around all the time, and you know, there's not, you know, a dorm with food readily available. So I took that advice to heart. And like I said, one thing I really like, maximizing, you know, when there was an opportunity to do something with my friends or to learn or engage, I seized it. And even with professors, one thing that I did, and my parents might agree or not agree, you know, I loved my classes, but I probably wasn't the most academic of students. In part because I was selfish at that time. I was like, I really want to learn what I want to learn, and I'm not going to engage as much in topics I wasn't interested. I really was focused on my specific on my interests. But I cultivated great relationships with, you know, my you know, Sid Altman and that whole lab and that team, and my physics teacher, who I was not the best physics student. But Malcolm, his name was, and we followed him around. Like I would just follow him and ask questions. And so I feel like I'm pretty actually happy. Like I feel like I did college well. And the main piece of advice that in some ways I give to, when I think of my roommates and other friends that I had, people stress so much about what's coming next.
Yeah.
And it's one thing that, in some ways, and actually maybe this is more of a pivotal moment. My freshman year of college, one of my closest friends from high school died. And this was someone who like embodied like the spirit, like freedom and enthusiasm and spirit for life. And I was really shook by his death. And it made me realize how fragile life really is, and that I wanted to focus on the opportunities. And in some ways you can never plan and you can never predict. And for that reason, I actually really stopped worrying. Like in high school, I was probably a lot more tightly wound, type A, like here's it. And I stopped worrying. And it was like, you know what? You don't know what's gonna come. You have to ride the waves. And I think that is something, and because I had that attitude, it allowed me to really, I think, take advantage of the opportunities that came my way. You know, like even how I ended up as a master's aide. Like I said, freshman year, I was having a really hard time. Like I really struggled with the weather. I was like East Coast culture is very different than West Coast culture. And I was struggling. And in some ways, like through that struggling, it was Barbara Goddard who got to know me, and she said, why don't you come be a master's aide? And suddenly I had a little community that became really important to me the whole time. But if I hadn't struggled and I hadn't had that experience, I wouldn't have necessarily had this community. And part of, again, for me at every time is allowing you to accept this is your moment of time, and what is it that's coming, see the opportunities and then just take them and not be afraid.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about 23andMe, since that was seizing an opportunity, I suspect. You founded 23andMe in 2006. It's only 10 years after you graduate from Yale. You're now the CEO. 23andMe has a global reach. It's helping people access, understand, benefit from the human genome. You're a data company, you're a health company, you're a wellness company, you're a research operation. 14 years ago, 15 years ago, when you founded the company, what were you thinking? What's the founding story here?
Yeah, I had to switch into a new picture for you as we switch topics. Me and Bernie.
I know.
So my story for graduation, like when I graduated college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And my parents, I'm thankful to my parents for this, is that they allowed me to, in some ways just try out different roles. And I drove cross country, and I came home, and I was tired. College is an intense experience, and I wanted to just babysit and be a nanny. And I was a nanny for a while. And at some point, my mom kind of gently encouraged me to go to a job fair. And I went to a job fair, and I met somebody from a bank who offered me, an internship where I was answering phones. And like one of the most important things that I learned is just take any job. It doesn't matter. Like you learn something everywhere. Like whatever you do, you learn. And so I took the job, and I learned that I definitely did not want to work in a big bank. And sometimes learning the negative is also really helpful. And the woman passed on my resume to an investment group in Sweden. And I took the interview in New York, in some ways also just because I wanted the frequent flyer miles. I wasn't really interested in the job. And once I got out there, I just it was an interesting dialogue. Like I spent as much time interviewing them as they were interviewing me. I asked just a ton of questions, and it sounded really pretty fascinating. Like I was going to be researching healthcare companies and biotech companies. And I don't know, it sounded really interesting. And I'd never even, I could live in New York. It was all these things I'd never thought of. So I took the job, and lo and behold, I loved it. I loved it. And I remember telling them, which was probably a mistake, that I would work for free. And so never tell your employer that. But I just was I love it. I love it so much. And I was there every night till 11 o'clock. I poured my heart in. And again, part of for me was also learning that passion. And over time, I ended up investing in healthcare companies for about 10 years. And over time, I started to realize that the healthcare system was not actually reflective of what was of my best interest. And I had always been really interested in the question of nature and nurture. And even when I was at Yale, I took a number of classes in genetics, and I was so fascinated and captivated by molecular biology. Like the idea that you have this incredible communication system and you have no idea how it works was just amazing to me. And I started investing in companies related to the human genome. And there was a bunch of companies taking off in the late 90s. And it was a fascinating time. And I started to realize, though, that, you know, like I said, it just wasn't in your best interest always. And that I wanted to do something that actually was going to, you know, help people be healthier. And one thing that I learned about healthcare is that no one makes money when you're healthy. So if you are diabetic, there's all kinds of ways, from insulin to diabetic like eye appointments to foot appointments to needles to tests. There's all kinds of ways that you make money if you're sick. But if you actually never touch the system, no one makes money on you. And I think that, like, to me, that's a structural issue. Like, there's healthcare is an amazing, like, there's so many great people who work in healthcare and who really care and are doing the right things, but the ship is just pointing in the wrong direction. And I was really inspired by the HIV community and what they did. So also in the late 90s, I was investing in HIV companies, and I saw the activism. And for, again, those of you who are young enough to not remember this, there was, you know, incredible anger, and, you know, the pink triangle, death equals silence, and the activist community stormed the FDA and threw red paint. And they actually held groups to be accountable for the types of research that was going on. And I said to me, I was like, that's it. And again, they developed eventually, you know, really an effective treatment that's essentially a cure. And I said, that's what I want to do in all kinds of diseases. And I had the luxury of being able to see what was going on at home in the Silicon Valley world of, you know, social networking 2.0, and, you know, the ability for you to get a low-cost genome, and the ability for you to crowdsource communities coming together. And I decided I wanted to create a platform where people were going to get access to their genetic information. They could learn, like, watch the scientific revolution unfold, and that this would be a platform for people also to learn about how to prevent, but it was also going to be a platform about activism, and that we were going to create a whole new way of doing research.
Yeah, so this gets into the mission side of what you're all about. And if I were to try to capture what I think the mission of 23andMe is, it's something like giving individuals control over their health information, and in a way, taking it from the medical profession, taking it from the insurance companies, and providing it to the consumer themselves. And if that's accurate, well, first of all, is that accurate? And if so, how does that flow through, or how does your actual mission flow through 23andMe's business model?
Yeah, the mission of the company is to help people access, understand, and benefit from the human genome.
Yeah.
And everything that we do is very deliberate. And honestly, when I think back on my life, every experience I've ever had has added up into impacting the decisions that we've made about 23andMe. And the 10 years I spent on Wall Street in some ways were the best education I ever could have gotten about how the system works and how I want to be entirely outside of the system. Mm-hmm. So one of the reasons why 23andMe is direct to consumer is because I think it's important to actually self-pay and to not actually take reimbursement dollars, to have a relationship directly with the consumer. And I think people don't realize how much the system is challenged when, you know, a third party pays. Like, imagine if you were, imagine if, you know, there was a third party who decided, you know, how they're going to, like, the food that you were going to eat. It wouldn't necessarily be the right kind of choice. So direct to consumer was always really important to me. And one thing I learned when I was investing in India and other countries was that there could be a direct to consumer marketplace, and it could actually work quite well. and that healthcare could be accessible and didn't need to be as expensive. I think one of the other key things that we challenged, I found it insulting, frankly, that the concept that people couldn't understand their own genomes. And I think that there is like I come from, my dad was at Stanford, and I'm friends with a lot of great scientists. And one thing that I really react strongly to is any kind of white coat elitism. And I believe strongly anyone could be a scientist. And one thing, I worked at NIH after my junior year, and one thing I learned working with patients, like I got all kinds of patients who came in who knew nothing, who did not have a formal education background, and they were incredibly competent talking about their cancer. And to this day, I have, I'll go and do Today Show, and I have somebody doing my hair, and the person will go in great detail about the latest in, immunotherapy. And I feel really strongly that just because you have a degree and you have a white coat doesn't necessarily mean that, you don't share the scientific knowledge to everybody, that you don't need to have the white coat to actually be able to appreciate science. And I can say, I like to, I love science. I'm not necessarily the best scientist. And I have a massive appreciation, and I can absolutely hire incredible talent, but it doesn't mean that I can't necessarily play in the field and be part of it. So again, that was a really key component of 23andMe. And like I said, the benefit is where I said, if we all come together, similar to the HIV community, if we all come together, we have the opportunity to crowdsource discoveries and theoretically, hopefully cures one day. And that no one company was ever going to be able to amass enough data to actually really have that kind of impact. And so that was one thing that, again, as when I think about the 3 core pillars of our mission: access, understand, and benefit from the human genome.
Yeah. So to broaden the discussion just a little bit, obviously, privacy is a huge issue in Silicon Valley and in Washington, also around companies such as yours. What do you do? Let me ask, how do you approach the issue of customer privacy, and how can you do that in a way that benefits both your customers and your business?
One thing that I've always felt strongly about healthcare is that healthcare patients are very rarely given choice.
Yeah.
So when I walk into any hospital, I have to sign the documents, and I don't get my medical records right away. And honestly, if an insurance company is using, paying for the bill, I have no idea where my data goes. And I find that the lack of transparency in the healthcare system also, again, I found incredibly offensive. And when I was on Wall Street, I had all kinds of companies, talking about these databases of consumer information, but none of those consumers are allowed to have access to it. So it's a key,
or even know that their data are in those databases, right?
Absolutely. People don't know. And I would love one day, there's all kinds of privacy legislation out there now for tech companies where you have to have a way of being able to audit to see where your information goes. I would absolutely love to see that happen in healthcare. Mm-hmm. And actually see. And there's stories like Henrietta Lacks, where her, if people don't know the story, where her sample was used and it went on to make the HeLa cells, which was a cell type that I used all the time. But she was never properly consented. And one of the key lines from the book that I loved is she said, I would have loved to have consent. I would have loved to participate. I just wanted to know I was participating.
Exactly.
And I think it's such a key component. Like people need to have that transparency. And I think one of the things I'm really proud of that 23andMe has done is we've challenged this notion that people don't actually want to participate. Mm-hmm. People say all the time, like, it's really hard to get customers into research. And I actually feel like we have over 80% of the 23andMe customer base participates in research. So privacy, the foundation of our privacy practice is entirely based on transparency and giving our customers choice. And that was kind of my point also. Like when I go to the medical system, I don't get transparency and I don't get choice. And if I want to opt out of something, or I don't want my information going in such a way, there's never an opportunity to say no. And I think even on research, on clinical studies, what if I opt into a study that you're performing? Can I ever opt out? Yeah. And so at 23andMe, we allow people to say, I want to participate, but then now I don't want to participate anymore. And sometimes you change your mind. And I think that is one of the core tenets of 23andMe is how do we actually build trust? Like what's truly the right thing to do? And in some ways, like when you take a consumer angle on it, you actually think about like, hey, me as a person, what would I actually want to do? And not necessarily just about, again, when you're going through a clinical trial with a pharma company and there's a clinical research organization, or it's so far removed that you lose sight of actually what is it that that person actually wants. So everything that 23andMe has done is because we have this direct relationship with the consumer, we hear from customers all the time when they're, unhappy about something. And it's really everything we have done then is focused on making sure we can do everything we can for the transparency and the choice.
Yeah, while we're talking about what is the right thing to do, let me switch to another issue in broader society, and that's the national anti-racism movement that has been unfolding in recent months. And you wrote a message to your employees in June. And you said, I need to hold myself accountable. And what does that mean at 23andMe? And what is your view of the right thing to do
I think
to promote anti-racism?
I think that the thing that people don't realize, like 23andMe is like, we're such a mission-driven company. So we really have people who care. And I look at a company like us, and there's issues still. Like I didn't have anyone who was in my senior leadership team who was Black. And like, how can I have a large research community and try to represent the whole population and not have representation at the top? And I think a lot of it starts with hiring and having an honest look at what are your practices. And I think the other area, we have three pillars that have been really important. So one was like looking at internally the hiring, like who have I hired? And it was also really important for me as part of that is to go to my LinkedIn and to reach out to as many candidates as I can who are diverse, or friends and others, and just introduce myself. Like I started just reaching out and introducing myself to a number of people. I think second, it's really important to recognize the microaggressions. And I think it's, it's hard to have like some of these conversations. And some of the experiences that my employees have had that I was unaware of, I can understand. Like it's awful. And even one of my kids' physicians who's Black, and he said he's like, I'm regularly pulled over on the freeway. He's like, when I drive back and forth from San Francisco to Stanford, I'm pulled over at least once a month. And those experiences and understanding are it's important to have that dialogue. And then understand you can't figure out what to change unless you first have that dialogue. I think the third area is looking at our spending practice. We spend a lot of money, and we're doing an audit right now. And thankfully, thanks to Xander Lurie at SurveyMonkey, who led this, there's a coalition of a lot of us all saying, let's look at all of our vendors. Mm-hmm. And is there diversity there? So I've made also, and then we're also looking at our product side. So is the product also representative? So I've made commitments that we actually have, like you can't change until I get the right, like I need a diverse population. And we've done a good job, especially on gender, but I need a diverse population. And the issue to solve that is about the funnel. And am I actually recruiting? Am I going to the right places? Am I finding people in the right areas? And the only area where I have found that I'd actually love to see Yale do work on is there is really a lack of underrepresented minorities in basic science. Yeah. And that's something that I think 23andMe can have an impact on. And I'd also love to see them in genetics. we can absolutely do something. We can provide internships, we can do more work, but inspiring those communities to have a role in basic science, not necessarily as a physician, but in basic science, I think is critical. And there was a great New York Times, sorry, just to interrupt. There's a great New York Times yesterday about COVID-19 and trying to recruit Blacks into the COVID-19 study. And one of the quotes from there said, "I trust the science, I don't trust the scientists." And that to me speaks strongly to a lack of representation. And so that's where something I feel pretty strongly, like 23andMe will be doing what we can to try and help solve that.
And maybe that's something we can work on together. It's a huge passion for me and others here at Yale also to see a more diverse set of scientists helping to lead and inform our country. Let's look to the future a little bit, and then we'll go to some questions that people have written in for you. So you're a trailblazer in personalized medicine and genetics, consumer genetics, I guess we could call it. You data science and use of big data in personalized medicine, very important to you. Obviously grounded in the genome. What's next? Where is there some place where we're gonna where studying the genome is gonna help us that we just have never thought about before, or some other line of business, or what's next?
Yes, it's getting very exciting. I must pull you closer. I'm so excited about the future because I feel like it's taken me 10 plus years to build out this infrastructure. But if you think about what people want, like if I ask you, like, what do you want? You don't want to be like, oh, I have, I'm well managed at 100, or, I'm sick, but I manage these things. Like, we all want to be healthy at 100.
Yeah.
And I am really excited about the potential of genetics to tell you what you're potentially at risk for. And when you know what you're at risk for, you have an opportunity to change your behavior. So the thing that inspired me, when I was 5 years old, I asked my mom made a comment about jeans. And I was like, what jeans? My sister's wearing shorts. And she's like, no, there's genes. And that led to the whole discussion of nature versus nurture. And since that moment, I have been so passionate and fascinated by the nurture. Like, what is it that I can actually change? Because you're given a deck of cards. You can't change your hand, but you absolutely can change your environment. And so I've been always fascinated. Like, if I'm genetically high risk for something, what is it I need to do to change? And so one of the things that has always agitated me as well, that I learned from the Wall Street days, is that the medical community has uniformly sort of assumed that you are never going to change your behavior. And I find it a really sad perspective. Like, if someone, it's what, like my mom, like she writes about this in her book. If you expect something of people, they're going to do it. If I look at you and I just say, oh, like you wrote a horrible essay, all your essays are going to be horrible. It's awful to feel that way, that nobody believes in you. And the medical world looks at you in this way. And they always, like, the number one thing that people fight with me about is that, oh, you're never going to get people to change their behavior. People don't change. And I strongly believe it's that people are not given the right tools and they don't have the right path to actually make the changes that they need to. And one thing, actually, it's a part of a book that's actually come out from Yale. There's that book Connected. And one thing that you learn from the book Connected is that your circle of influence. So how crazy is it that our healthcare system is based on us all having our own insurance, but we have all this data that shows what changes behavior is your close circle of friends. So if I'm going to change, like, one of the best parts about 23andMe is the fact that we actually do have this ancestry component and the family component. So if I'm telling you, and that genetics, if you're high risk for type 2 diabetes, there's a good chance that someone else in your family is high risk. So I have an opportunity now to change all of your behavior. And you actually care. That's one thing I find is, like, but the people I have and everything I ever learned from working in hospitals is no one wants to be there. Like, people, no one's ever like, oh, it's a beautiful day outside, I'd rather get a colonoscopy. Like, no, people wanna try to stay healthy. So when given something in black and white, there's an opportunity. And I think what's the silver lining in my tiny ecosystem of digital health is that COVID-19 has driven home and shown that so much of healthcare can actually be online. If I have a question about my mole, I can take a picture of it and send it in. If my daughter has, potentially an ear infection, there's a little device I can actually have, and I can send it to my doctor. If I have questions, I can just, send an email or a text or a chat with a physician. So much of healthcare can actually be online. And suddenly, overnight, we've had to become comfortable with it. So there's an incredible opportunity that healthcare is actually going to finally get into the internet age. And I think there's an opportunity to, frankly, do what's actually right by all of the individuals and to help them prevent.
Yeah, and not just physical health care. I'm a psychologist, mental health care as well. Using, awful lot of therapy going on.
Yeah, like Kaiser Permanente just gave me a free account to Calm, and I love it. Like I felt like I'm a pretty happy person. But having an account and I can meditate with my kids for 5-10 minutes a day is amazing.
Yeah.
And so I think mental health is absolutely one of those things where there's an opportunity to really help people get the connection that they need, where you just reduce the barriers. It's a huge opportunity.
Huge opportunity. Let me turn to the questions that people who are watching submitted. When they registered to attend, they submitted questions, and I'm just going to read you the first few that came in, and be very interested in your thoughts. So one was about young girls who are discouraged from science. Maybe they have an interest in science, they're dabbling in science, but they're being discouraged by others from careers in science. What do you say to them? How do you motivate them to take science seriously?
I think that there's an issue. I think science is really intimidating. And I just have to say, the number of people who, like, I have one good friend, I loved physics. And I had one good friend who told me, he was like, well, Anne, I know you want to take that class, but that's for the really bright students. And the thing that I would like to encourage people to do is that, everyone's great at something. And if you're passionate about something or you think it's interesting, don't worry if you're not necessarily great at the exam, or, there's a lot of aspects of how science was taught that I did not love. Like, I'm incredibly passionate about it, but I didn't love a lot of ways that it was disseminated to me. So what I say to kids all the time, kids love mystery. Like my daughter right now, she's only 16 months. Like the highlight of her day is peekaboo and like figuring like what's under the box. So the most exciting thing for me about genetics is that you have this code, like 4 simple letters, and you have all the diversity in life. How is that possible? It's amazing. Like how, like I think about, like I love, one of my father's best friends who is a leading oncologist at Stanford, and he wears the shirt that says 50% banana. I'm like, you are like, you have DNA with a banana. And I think that one thing—
I don't, I'm sorry. That's impossible.
I just like, and my kids love that concept. Like I taught a genetics class to my kids and like talking, it's called You Share Genes With Me. We wrote a board book. And in getting kids to be excited, like you're actually connected to all life on this planet. How cool is that? And there's reasons, like there's these little codes and they turn on and off. It's a miracle. So I would argue like all kids are interested. Like for those out there who care about science education, there's an incredible opportunity to make it more fun. And I think one of the number one things I want to do with 23andMe is to like not make it boring. Like I joked with you earlier, like when I took genetics at Yale and I was just frankly not that interested in yeast genetics. I wanted to know about my own genetics. And so I didn't do the best in the class, but I was like, what's so exciting for kids is to learn about genetics through themselves. So I encourage like everyone who cares about science education, science is about mystery and uncovering And I had one postdoc in my lab, and I remember I loved when we would go to, I forgot the name of the machine, but it was like where you would like, it would get this kind of the x-ray, and it would uncode and you would know if your experiment worked. And I always wanted to come to that moment, because the moment of revelation, science is the most exciting sense of discovery and adventure you could ever find. So we need more science educators who bring that passion and help kids realize you don't need to watch any of those like mystery TV shows. It's all here in your human body, and you can pursue that sense of discovery. And we just need, like, again, I look at the educators out there. We need more people who are open and welcoming and less critical.
Yeah, you know, that's how I got excited about science too. My dad was a polymer chemist at Bell Laboratories in Murray Hill, New Jersey, and he'd take us into the lab when we were 6, 7, 8 years old, and do experiments with us, and it was really exciting. And it was not blackboard science; it was hands-on science. Let me ask you this. You know, we're in the middle of a pandemic that is not over. And anything in the data that you're seeing from 23andMe that might provide insights about COVID-19?
I'm really proud of the 23andMe community, because I mentioned, part of the idea with 23andMe was, how is it that I can set up ongoing research? Like, again, with the internet, when I'm looking for a hotel in Egypt, like, I don't have to go to the store and like the travel store and like ask them and get a brochure and then call them. Like, I just do a search. And so I wanted to come up with a way of doing research that was like, I do a search. Like, I just type in the information I want and I can pull up an analysis. So when COVID hit on April 6th, we put out a survey to our customers. We now have roughly 1.2 million customers who have taken that survey. We have over, I think, 25,000 customers who have said that they've had COVID-19. And so we were able to actually do what I said is the search. Like, I have an incredible amount of data. I have a huge number of controls, and I can do this analysis. And we saw in there that customers who are O positive, have the O blood type, look like they have, roughly 18 to 16% protection on severity and susceptibility. And there's a lot in that data, and that's one thing that we can actually do. And again, philosophically, mission-wise, we're very aligned with trying to share. So how is it we can partner with some of these other consortiums? A number of pharma companies obviously are running forward with their vaccines. So we're very much part of that. So I'm optimistic that there will be more that comes. But we have our first paper out. It's in a preprint, and we've been submitting it. That is there about the O blood type and some other kind of interesting, less well-defined findings.
Great, very interesting. And so as you think about, we have a question about the future also. If you think about the challenges in your industry over the next 5 or 10 years, you've kind of touched on some of them. We talked about the privacy issue, and but what else? What are the big challenges? What's going to get in your way over the next 5, 10 years?
Well, without a doubt, the biggest issue facing science, and I would argue actually our country, is the credibility of what is science.
Yeah.
Like there's a massive question of like, I don't trust it. And trust, like I said, this New York Times article that came out the other day is like, I trust science, but I don't trust the scientists. So, again, one thing I'm really proud of, and again, 23 is mission driven, and we will always do what's right by our customers, and making sure that we are science, like we have the science integrity is everything. So I worry, the biggest thing that I worry about is where are we going with science and building out that trust with our customer. And I'm really proud of how our customers trust us. Like the fact that we have an 80 to 85% consent rate is frankly amazing.
Yeah.
And that our customers come back when we ask them about questions about themselves, they're responsive. And I think part of the reason why they are responsive is like we've really built out over time a history of doing what's right by people. and, you know, trying to make the best out of, you know, the information that they've trusted us with.
Yeah.
So that is, I'm really worried about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of things intersecting there, right? There's the erosion of belief encouraged by some in the value of expertise.
Yep.
There's the privacy worry that we talked about, and the consent worry that's always been out there, particularly in communities that have been abused in times gone by. And
Yeah.
it's all kind of coming together. It sounds like in the way you're thinking about the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So before we wrap up, I bet there's something I haven't asked you about. Either, and it could be about your Yale experience, your forming 23andMe, the current science, the future,
I think,
that we just didn't touch on. And I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit.
yeah, I think two things. Like, I love the Yale community. And I think part of the reason why I love the community is I think that people, like really are like they find passion and they want to do right by the world. And overwhelmingly, like when I think about, you know, I'm almost 25 years out now, what people have done is really impressive. So I just want to encourage people to not be afraid of the unknown, that so many of the success stories come serendipitously, and to, in some ways, just like jump out, like when you're done, or when opportunities come, just take them. And my, you know, my mom, people always laugh when I say this, but like, don't be afraid to quit something. And if you're in a job that doesn't work, you know, being able to change. And like I said, I'm really proud of my Yale community, because again, and I have a lot of respect always for people who I feel like can't be bought.
Mm.
And it's one of those things I think a lot about, people who won't change their values, even if you really try to buy them. And I think it's an incredible community for that reason. Second thing, I think one thing that is always really important to me, and it came up when we chatted a little bit earlier, is the sense of work-life balance.
Yeah.
And one thing that I have always really cringed from is a fake image. And my mom, like as a child, I listened all the time to Free to Be You and Me. And you know that song, I assume. So, or the album. And there was a song in there about marketing. And it was all about the story of like this woman washing the dishes, and she's smiling and she's happy. And, you know, and they say at the end of the song, like, don't forget, the reason why that woman is smiling is because she's paid. And I've always really thought about that. Like, the number one thing in life I can't stand is veneers. Like, I'm never excessively polished. I have no makeup on. I'm wearing my JE shirt just because of you guys. But it's really important for me to be real. And I think being real is part of what allows me to have work-life balance. It allows my kids to feel like they're part of it. Like, I have to encourage my kids to be around. I have to have my employees know sometimes I have bad days and sometimes I'm off. And so the more I'm honest, the same way I said for my customers, it's really important and transparent. I also want to be transparent in my life. And I think that having that kind of honesty and that realness is part of what has enabled me to have a true work-life balance. And I think it's more and more people are craving what's real and not what's your image.
Yeah, well, I know this is true because I have met you many times when you've been pushing a bicycle or wearing yoga clothes or had a child, baby on your knee. It's one of the wonderful
I almost
things.
did this from my exercise bike, but I decided to say,
I've had
stable for you. Yeah.
I've had conversations with you when you've been on your exercise bike. I am so sorry that we have to draw this to a close. Your energy and your intelligence and your story and your very warm nostalgia about Yale all come together in a way that inspires me, and I think every one of us who are watching this or who will watch the recording of it. And I have to tell you, we could go on for hours, but thank you for being with us and speaking with us. Thank you for accepting the invitation to be the 2020 Gordon Grand Fellow. I thank Gordon Grand for making the gift that allowed this series to happen. I thank Dean Kerwin Charles and the Yale School of Management, who are our hosts today. I mostly thank everyone who joined us and is spending a little time with us to celebrate you, to celebrate Yale, and to honor the memory of Gordon Grand. You know, this is such an extraordinary opportunity for the Yale community. They get to hear from you, an internationally recognized business leader, entrepreneur, a biologist, and of course, a treasured Yale alumna. This is exactly, I think, what Gordon Grand's family envisioned when this fellowship was set up. The fellowship's about 50 years old. So thank you for being so candid. Thank you for being so generous.
Well, I remember coming to these fellowships all the time. So again, I think about like the people in the crowd now and just, again, that enthusiasm to watch what you all do over the next 20 years.
Well, we will welcome you back anytime you want to come to KEBIS. And I know you're going to come back to KEBIS for part 2 of this fellowship as soon as we can schedule it with you. So we're all looking forward to that as well. So thank you everyone for joining us. Depending on where you're watching it, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and everybody stay healthy in these challenging times. Thank you so much, Anne.
Really Thank you. It was so great.
Take care. Be well.
Thank you.